Hello and welcome to MedTech Evolution or Revolution, from hospital at home to care anytime, anywhere. Today's webinar is sponsored by S3 Connected Health and produced by SmartBrief. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from SmartBrief and I'm excited to be your moderator for this especially timely presentation. Now, before we get to today's great conversation, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. So with that, let's get to today's fascinating session. So connectivity is now a must-have requirement for medical devices, with MedTech companies embracing digital health initiatives to extend the value of their offerings. So the drivers for change are compelling, from addressing the needs of healthcare providers, easing the administrative burden, overcoming staff shortages, and reducing clinical burnout. Then there are the increasing cost of care, the rise of value-based care, the shift from acute to chronic diseases, and the transition of treatments outside of clinical settings. So a choice is becoming clear, sort of a gradual evolution to increased connectivity in devices within their current settings, or a revolution to a fundamentally different business model with a transition to hospital at home and care for patients anytime, anywhere. So one aspect that is certain, the challenges associated with digital health solutions and services require a different approach. So in this session, we're going to focus on the future of device connectivity, the move to hospital at home, and to care anytime, anywhere. And we'll look at this question for the device, digital health solutions and services, and MedTech's value proposition. So we'll identify key reasons why digital health initiatives stop before they scale, and we'll explore examples from industry-leading experts on solutions that address the new reality of connectivity, hospital at home, and care anytime, anywhere. We've got an outstanding panel today to walk through all those issues, and it's my pleasure to introduce them now. We have Bill Betton, who's Director of Solutions for MedTech at S3 Connected Health. We have Dr. AJ Shah, who's Associate Director of Strategy and Innovation at Abbott. And we have John Rondoni, who's Chief Technology Officer at Inspire Medical Systems. So welcome to the three of you. I'm so pleased to have you all here. I just want to give everybody a chance to just say a few words about themselves. Bill, I'll start with you.
Hi, my name is Bill Betton, and as mentioned, I'm Director of Solutions for MedTech here in the U.S. for S3 Connected Health. We're happy to be sponsoring this webinar today on this very exciting and interesting topic as we discuss whether or not it's an evolution or revolution to get us to hospital to home and care anytime, anywhere. I'm trained as a physicist and an electrical engineer, spent much of my 40-plus year product development effort in big companies as well as small companies. I'll just say in the healthcare space, I've worked in everything from hearing aids to heart-lung machines to wearable devices. I've seen a little bit of everything. My exposure to digital health goes back to the 1990s with the advent of the DICOM standard and the efforts to convert to teleradiology and make that go forward. Fast forward to 15 years ago, and I was head of engineering at Nonin Medical, and we did the first Bluetooth connected pulse oximeter that was continuous certified. And I thought, great, digital health is finally here. We've gone from $1 million CT machines beaming images to government hospitals to a $300 pulse oximeter talking to a cell phone. Digital health must be here. 15 years later, we're still wondering when, where, and how it's going to arrive. We're going to talk about that today.
Excellent. And Dr. AJ Shah, maybe you can go next.
Sure. I'm so excited to be part of this panel this morning. As was mentioned, I'm AJ Shah. I am with Abbott. and I sit within our diabetes care division. So working really closely with our FreeCell Libre portfolio of continuous glucose monitors. And I've spent the last 4 years or so of my career focused on that technology and some of the digital tools and solutions that wrap around it. And as you can imagine, that's led to a lot of innovative things in the partnership space, which is another area I've been heavily focused on. I'm a general pediatrician by training, practiced primarily outpatient pediatrics with a little bit of inpatient medicine as well. And really have, throughout my career, had a focus or an interest in health IT and health technologies. Initially started about a decade, 15 years ago in the electronic health record space, got involved really early in that push, and had led the implementation of those systems in a number of large healthcare institutions, academic and community, across the United States. And so that sort of was my entry point into broader digital health, and has sort of led to where I am today, working specifically in the medical device industry, and again, focused on some of our wearable biosensing technology. So again, really looking forward to this conversation, and thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for being here. And last but not least, John Rondini.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for including me in this conversation. I'm really excited to talk to Bill and AJ about connectivity and how it can be used to improve the care for patients. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Inspire Medical Systems. We build implantable neuromodulation devices that are used to treat obstructive sleep apnea. So if you know people who have to sleep with a mask on at night, some people don't like to sleep with a mask on, and so they can get our implant and treat their sleep apnea without having to wear anything. My background is in implantable neuromodulation. I've been at Inspire for 16 years now. Prior to that, I worked at Medtronic Neuromodulation on a variety of implanted devices. We have had a strategy here at Inspire to lean into digital solutions to create a connected care environment for patients, sleep doctors, and to really connect that whole care ecosystem around sleep. We've been lucky enough not to be the first folks to move into connected care, hospital to home care for implanted devices. And so we've really tried to learn from the early work that's happened at companies like Medtronic and Boston Scientific and Abbott with their cardiac devices, and find ways to drive that further by leveraging modern technology and new approaches to connect patients and their providers to our platform and create value for the whole ecosystem along the way. So I think it'll be a great conversation.
Thanks so much, John. Appreciate it. So, Bill, maybe you can set the stage for us here.
I'm going to, and I'm going to set it from the perspective of S3 Connected Health. We're a firm that has kind of three things that we do: strategy and consulting for clients seeking to move into digital health. We have software and systems design, development, and support. So we help people build solutions that we've helped them strategize. And then finally, we have our own platform that we operate for some of the largest pharma clients and also MedTech clients. So we come at this from the perspective of partnering with companies like Abbott, or Inspire Medical and various others. And so we get a very broad view of what's happening in the marketplace over the 25 years that we've been doing this. So I'd like to start and give a little bit of an example here of where the industry's going, and then we'll all comment on this as well. So the first part of this slide talks about what's happening inside the industry. Historically, the device has been the center of the universe. In essence, someone would design a device, they put it out, they start doing something with it. We see the next stage of a device industry then going to some sort of connectivity. And this could be done with old wired, RS-232 cables in the old days with big plugs on the back, to flash drives, to sending a technician out to download information, to now we start to connect with wireless connectivity like Bluetooth, Ethernet, and Wi-Fi as well. And so you start to get data about the device. So now, more than just looking at what the device does and the information provides, the device companies could look at it and say, I'm getting data back about my device. And that typically was service data. In other words, how is it being used? Where is it being used? That sort of thing. Instead of sending a service tech out, I'll pull that information out. The next stage in the industry direction is operational enhancement. So I start to now look at pulling information out that's not just about the device and how it's being used, but it's also about the results it's providing and what insight does that give me into the how, when, where it's being used. I move along the scale to the right here, and we have therapy improvement. So now I start to look at device and turning it into a service. And finally, over on the far right, and I'll say that this is the future state that we're headed towards, is connected health, where I can provide care anytime, anywhere. So the industry is headed from an isolated device operating on its own all the way to ubiquitous connectivity where devices talk to one another, as evidenced over on the far right. But what does this mean for the device companies? And this is a critical question as well. And we've got representatives of the companies Abbott and Inspire Medical here, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. The MedTech companies have choices to make as they're doing this. They could stay as a device vendor. In other words, the device is still the innovation, and it's the center of focus and the center of the universe. That's a viable business model to follow and a viable approach to take. It means you're selling a thing, and the advantage of that thing is that it does a specific function. Or the device companies have an opportunity to become a digital enabler. And that basically what it means is you start to gather that information and do something with it. And you're providing that to other people to interact, provide insights for both operational and clinical efficiencies. So you can move partway down this chain of evolution, or you could become a player. You can create an ecosystem that maximizes the value that your medical device and your digital health offering is going to bring. And one of the big challenges here, and we'll touch on it in a few moments, is the fact that the med device companies have difficulty deciding where they want to be in this continuum. One more quick slide to show this, and then we're going to, I think, Scott, you've got some questions for us. So what this really drives, if you look at the top left corner, we're really good in today's world about in-hospital acute care. And that's what we've done for a century plus and continue to do. The hospital is a place you go when you're sick and you're dealing with a specific situation. We've moved to the right for chronic care, where we have issues of people coming back, and AJ and his efforts can talk a little bit about that as well. In the lower left, we have preventive care, and that to me is really the far out future. We've gotten better at moving from acute to chronic care. We still aren't doing much in the preventive care space. And then finally over on the right, we have episodic care. And in the middle of all this, we have ubiquitous care, which means I'm going to provide health care no matter where you are, when you are, or what your needs are. And that's kind of where we see ourselves evolving towards today. So I think we'll stop here with this. And Scott, I think you've got some questions for the panelists.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from John and AJ just your thoughts on where you think medical device companies are in this transition from device to data. So, John, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that there are different answers depending on what type of medical device company you are, and I think that that reflects the fact that this digital evolution or revolution is real. So I'll give sort of three examples I think that highlight some of those different areas. If you look at the traditional med tech companies, like the Boston Scientific or the Medtronic, they've really been building out these digital platforms around it. But there's been a new breed of companies that really are digital first and service first. For example, like iRhythm, which will be used, has a patch, it's a device, it's connected, but it's really a digital service that allows doctors to have these home cardiac diagnostics whenever and wherever they need. And then perhaps on the pure digital ecosystem side of it, there's companies that are even younger, such as EnsoData, which is creating an AI-driven ecosystem that drives efficiency in the sleep clinic and eventually in other clinics as well by simplifying the workload of doctors and connecting the data to wherever it needs to be. So I think it's an exciting time in that there are companies who are playing across that entire ecosystem. I do think that if you think about legacy device companies, the big ones, they are moving really left to right and starting around that device and wrapping services around it. And I think as they get further into the ecosystem management, it becomes more challenging for them. And so I'd love to hear from Bill and AJ around what they've seen there as well. But when I think about this from Inspire's perspective and perhaps a traditional MedTech perspective, I think it's really important to focus on that end ecosystem that was on the right side of the slide Bill showed. We are going to generate this data, and it's going to be used to deliver services and efficiency. And if we don't build an ecosystem as a MedTech community around that, somebody else is going to do that. And that ecosystem is ultimately going to be an incredibly important part of the value creation in healthcare. And so I believe that MedTech companies need to understand how they can play across this entire continuum, but they need to always have a vision for what does this ecosystem look like and make sure that they're building towards that future. So that's my 2 cents.
Excellent. Yeah, AJ, what are your thoughts on that? Where we are, where medical device companies are in that transition from device to data.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I think John made some key points, and I do want to just add on to that and maybe take a slightly different perspective from a large medical device company that for 135 years has been creating innovative medical device solutions. And as we know, those devices produce a lot of data. And now the question comes, how do we make that data meaningful and insightful to the end users, whether those are patients, caregivers, or providers, without just providing data? So it kind of always takes me back to 3 things that we think about at Abbott when we think about our devices and our data. And that's the impact it'll have on patients' health. I think our mission is really to help patients lead their healthiest, their fullest lives, and really allow them to live without, always thinking about that burden of disease. So, we call it the 3 Ds, but we think about digitizing, democratizing, and decentralizing. So what we mean by that is we have devices that are collecting data about your body, sometimes maybe even helping your body manage diseases better through that solution or a suite of connected solutions. So how do we elevate that insight, that data into insights and bring that to the patient? Democratizing it. So I think accessibility and affordability is always central to what we do. If we can't do that, then I think our devices only have limited impact at the end of the day. So how can we get it to more people that can benefit from them? And I mean people in the broad sense, not just patients, but again, the caregivers and the healthcare providers. And then finally, how do we decentralize this? And I think this really hits on a theme of this webinar is how do we take care out of traditional settings like the hospital into less acute settings and even care in the home, and thinking through the challenges of bringing care into the home. So, I think, again, going back to data, the key principle, if I had to sum it up, is, it's not just the data. And certainly we have devices that can create voluminous amounts of data. Just our FreeStyle Libre is an example alone, collecting a glucose data point every minute, 1,440 data points a minute. Without contextualizing that and producing the right insights from that can be rather meaningless and dare say burdensome to clinicians and caregivers. So how do we actually bring the insights of that data? And that's really allowed us to change the game in diabetes care. And, I could probably say this, that the FreeStyle Libre has become the most successful medical device in history because we've kind of kept that core principle at the forefront as we've gone along and developed this device and then commercially executed upon that and made it available and accessible to now patients in 60 countries around the world.
Excellent. Yeah, I love the 3D framework there. I want to stick with one thing that you talked about, which was the at-home care, and maybe drill into that a little bit more. So what characteristics distinguish care at home from hospital care? And sticking with you, AJ, for a minute, and then I'd love to get everybody else to weigh in on it as well.
Yeah, I think it's a question that you can come at from multiple angles, but I think choosing one, I think it is the role of the patient and their caregivers in that care that truly distinguishes it from hospital care. So I think when we think about devices that you're taking from the hospital and bringing into the home, you really have to think through who is interacting with those devices. And in the hospital, we sometimes take for granted that it's not just, having your medical assistants, or your nurses, or your providers, but you actually have in a hospital an entire IT infrastructure that's built to kind of handle these different things. And these are dozens and dozens of teams. And, we never want to talk about devices not operating to the standards or failing. But if that does happen, there are people there that have a very narrow responsibility to come in and address a particular issue, and then also work across these teams. When you take those outside of the home, you're now placing all that burden on sometimes a patient who's also trying to manage his or her disease, a caregiver that's maybe managing work, that particular individual with their disease, maybe other folks in the household maybe managing their own disease. So now we're adding all this other consideration onto them. So it really comes back to how do we make this as easy and seamless as possible? And just thinking through things like how is that device going to communicate data is something that on the surface might sound easy. We all have Wi-Fi. We live in areas, a lot of us, where we have good cellular connectivity, but that's not true for everybody. Whether it's from an affordability standpoint or just a rural setting where that infrastructure is not there. So, when we think about the devices, and I kind of come back to it, as a medical device company that's been innovating for, over 100 years, the innovation is not going to solve it alone. If we don't really think about the nuances of care in the home, about some of that extra burden that we're inevitably going to put on the patient, and how we solve for that, I think, that's where these devices can fail in the home, to be honest.
If I could add, I'd like to build on top of what they said and then give John a shot at this too, because his device is very home-centric as well. But a couple of things. I'll echo what was said previously, and we're in it to improve healthcare as well. One of the challenges is basically money. It's a question of how do companies get rewarded for this collection and integration. As John pointed out earlier, there are a lot of startups that are entering into it as well. They focus on the disease state. They focus on doing something there. There's the financial reward of doing that. As an engineer, I start to look at the interoperability question, and going back to the DICOM days when we worked on that, to continue to looking at putting standards in place. Do we continue to create islands of information that are useful but inaccessible to others? And so I want to build on another point that AJ made then, which is gathering and creating data is good, but I need to pull that together. I need to organize it, structure it, and make it useful. I believe in a world right now and where the promise of digital health, the promise of medicine everywhere is the fact that I can look at myself 24/7, 365 in a number of different ways. But that doesn't do me any good if I have to open 5 apps to look at all of those different things. And so I think the integration and fusion of this information and how we pull it together is going to be absolutely critical. And we'll talk more about that probably in a little bit. So now I'll pass the baton to John, and you can comment on the differences I do want to say one last thing. One of the challenges of home use devices is, in addition, they have to be easy to use, but they have to be medically relevant. And we could have a huge debate and discussion around the use of watches versus medical devices and all of that. The only point I'll make here is, in order to use devices for medically relevant conclusions, they need to be designed as a medical device if you're going to draw a conclusion from that. So as we see a proliferation of digital health devices, it's incumbent upon us to define what digital health really means, because it can stretch from a simple accelerometer worn on a wrist to monitor rehab, to a fancy watch, to a real medical device at home. Sorry, I'll stop. John, your turn.
No, that was great, Bill. I love it. I agree with all of it. I think also AJ's points are right on. I'll maybe add 2 things to the conversation. First is the opportunity of at-home care. And I think that this slide here does a really nice job of illustrating this. When we're in the hospital, it's acute care. Maybe if you're lucky, it's chronic or episodic, where there's an ongoing relationship with that doctor. But the success or failure of any medical intervention is what happens day in and day out. What are those habits of our patients? And by engaging with our patients at home to improve their sleep, to manage their diabetes, that is where the opportunity to have a real impact on the long-term outcomes and the long-term costs of care exists. And so the opportunity here to help public health, to help patients live better lives by engaging with them every day at home is huge, and gets me really excited about what's happening in this space. And so there are a lot of challenges, but I think what gets us all up and going is the opportunity to have that kind of impact by really changing how patients live their lives every day. The other point that I'll make is around these devices, and Bill made a really good point that whatever device is being used in the home has to provide data that's medically relevant. And one of the things that's getting me excited is what we're seeing happening outside the healthcare ecosystem that's moving into it. So if you look at companies like Samsung and Aura with their Ring, and Apple, they are building products that have sensors that could be used for gathering medical information. But there is a challenge where that data isn't always medically relevant. But there are also a new breed of companies, such as EnsoData, who are using artificial intelligence and building software as a medical device that can be layered on top of these inexpensive sensors at home to deliver medical grade insights and data using sensors that are effectively consumer grade sensors. And so that is a huge opportunity in the future to build these medical device layers on top of devices that we use every day, to help provide the data to ecosystems and to providers to have that impact on patients every day.
Excellent points from everyone. This has been an excellent discussion so far, really interesting. Unfortunately, we do need to move along, so I want to do a quick poll before we move into our next section. And this one's just about which areas of device evolution are the biggest challenges for MedTech companies. We'd love for you guys to, I'll choose up to 3 options like connectivity and interoperability with other devices, closed loop autonomous operations, cybersecurity and data privacy, post-market surveillance, integration with EHR, HIS, company and clinician value propositions, access and affordability, and consumer-like usability. A lot of these are topics that we've hit on, in the conversation so far, and the answers are starting to flood in. Appreciate everybody putting their answers in. We'll just give just a minute here for everybody. Really appreciate your answers. We'd love to hear from you, and what you think are those top 3 challenges for MedTech companies. Meanwhile, we do see some questions coming in. We will save a little time for the Q&A at the end. Some great questions already. Appreciate that, and looking forward to more of those. So we'll leave this up for just another maybe 15 seconds or so. Hopefully you've all had time to digest the nuanced answers here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this down, and we can take a look at what we got. Bill, it looks like our most popular answer was the connectivity and interoperability with other devices. That was at 70%. And the follow-up to that is cybersecurity and data privacy at 58%. And since we just had the Preakness over the weekend or recently, we'll go win, place, or show. We also had a company and clinician value propositions was at 45%. Those numbers surprise you at all, or is that about what you
not Not really, and as a guy who's been focused on connectivity and at S3 Connected Health, it's built into our name. We're focusing on getting devices to connect, and the key is not just connection, but it's interoperability. And the crude analogy I'll use is for those of us who are connectivity means my cell phone will talk to somebody in China, as an example. Interoperability means that since I don't speak Chinese, we can't understand one another when I'm talking on the other end. True interoperability comes about when the magic of AI will allow me to talk at my end, and that person will hear what they want to hear on the other end, and we'll have a seamless conversation. It's a crude analogy to the interoperability of medical devices. It's when a cardiovascular device from one company will play with a glucose monitoring system from another, and I can pull all that information together as a whole. So that one doesn't surprise me. Cybersecurity, anybody who reads the paper nowadays, we're seeing the healthcare industry just get hit from the perspective of tying up your medical records and shutting down clinics, let alone doing something with your data. So I'm not at all surprised. I'm a little surprised that it talks about the nature of the audience here, company and clinician value propositions. I mentioned money earlier, and I hate to be crass about it, but with our clients, and we probably talk to and work with 30 different clients a year, ranging from Fortune 500 pharma and med device down to brand new startups. One of the key issues for them is raising money and getting paid for their work paid for at the end. So I'm a little surprised that one popped up. But otherwise, I think not too terribly surprised. And this leads us, I know we're going to run out. We could spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to go to the next topic then. We want to talk about the reasons why digital health hasn't been moving forward. And I'm going to use this slide then to set the stage, and then we'll have the panel discussion as well. So you see there's a lot of stakeholders in this whole process. And we tend to think, and again, this is med device oriented, so we'll start down the bottom right, med device companies, right? We're building, designing, putting those products out. In between us and our patients, and often, in many cases, are providers. So we have to take them into account. AJ mentioned earlier that one of the key differences when you go to the home is the user of the product and their support network. In a hospital environment, traditionally, the providers are there and perhaps running the instrument, doing the tests. In the future, the consumers are going to be doing it themselves. But it's key because it gets to the heart of who does what with the information we're generating. Reimbursement and regulatory bodies have to approve it and get funding for it. Otherwise, you go nowhere. And payers and insurers have a vested interest in this. Every single block on this along the way, if you ask them the question, do you want access to the data and what are you going to do with it? Their basic answer is, of course, I want access. You get more complex when you say who owns that data. If people are honest, they'll say that the device generator has a claim to it, the provider has a claim, and the patient will say, hey, that's my data and I want to do something with it. So this is very, very complex, and it takes a lot of different people playing together to make all of this work. And it's these barriers that have collaborated to keep digital health from really spreading. I talked earlier about the path we were on from DICOM to Continua and pulse oximeters and hooking up the devices the way we can today. I'm a techie. I've been doing this for a really long time. My belief is that it's no longer as big a technological challenge. What we really have to do is look at the infrastructure. And on this slide, you see that infrastructure that has to change, whether it's a business model for a company, a payment model for an insurance company, whether it's the infrastructure and the way we do things within hospitals that has to be dealt with. So my challenge to the whole industry is the technology's here. We're ready to go and be put to work on this. How do we change the infrastructure in a manner that will allow us to really realize the value of digital health? I'll stop there because I know, Scott, you've got some questions, and we want to hear from AJ and John as well on this topic and on some of the barriers.
Yeah, excellent. So, we've identified several friction points in that Care Anywhere model. Which are the most critical issues associated with that transition to ubiquitous digital health? John, maybe I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciated Bill's insight as he sort of talked through these challenges. I agree with him that the technology is less of the barrier now than it ever has been. Everybody's walking around with these smartphones. They've got Bluetooth. They're connected. They're relatively straightforward to secure. And so we've never been in a better spot from an infrastructure standpoint to deliver this. The challenges, I think, that are most impactful come down to just behavior change, right? These clinicians have gone through decades of training. They've built successful practices, and we're coming in and asking them to do something different, right? And that is a difficult message to implement. It's a difficult thing to accomplish. I think everyone is excited about the opportunity. They want to engage with their patients in this way and to deliver care in an innovative way in the home. But they have to figure out how to integrate that into their practice, and they have to figure out how to bill insurance companies for the time that's associated for it. And then medical device companies have to figure out how they can have a business model that makes sense around it. And so those challenges are very present in all of these conversations. There has been some great progress on the billing side with remote therapeutic monitoring and remote physiologic monitoring codes, but these are still early stages. The cardiac world is a little bit farther down the pathway of making sure that there's appropriate reimbursement in place. But even there, that gets squeezed over time, right? As providers and payers look for efficiencies. And so really focusing on how we can make this very easy, how we can automate this to a large extent, how we can ensure that there is enough value flowing through the ecosystem so that we can deliver these solutions, I think are the key things. And even with all that, we still have to figure out a way to get people to want to change how they've done healthcare for decades. And so I think we're in for many more years of trying to continue to innovate and move this forward.
AJ, any thoughts on that one?
I agree with everything John said. I think when it comes to the success of digital health solutions or devices, really you could look at it from multiple different angles, and I think the key thing there is the interoperability. From my perspective, yes, you could talk about cost and effectiveness. You could talk about the regulatory approval, some of the cybersecurity, but interoperability seems to come up more and more so when we talk about these devices. And Abbott, medical devices, we work across a lot of different therapeutic areas. So although I focus a lot on diabetes, we have a lot of devices that work in the cardiology space. And as John mentioned, that area has seen a lot of growth and development, especially in recent years. But even on the diabetes side, I think interoperability is one of those things that from a patient, is important, and from a provider is equally, if not more important. So I can give two examples. So we talked a lot about wearables, consumer health. One of the things that we're actively exploring and actually have entered into some innovative partnerships around is integrating a medical device, a class 2 regulated medical device, into consumer wearables and consumer health applications. And an example of that is our integration with Weight Watchers, where a user of the Weight Watchers diabetes program can now receive their CGM glucose data directly in their Weight Watchers experience. Mm-hmm. And then the Weight Watchers algorithm is able to present certain personalized insights into maybe the meals you should eat, or a way that you can manage your personal points value, et cetera. For the provider, it's really about EHR integration. And as I mentioned when I introduced myself, I kind of stepped into this arena, focused very heavily on EHR integration. And over the 15, 17 years I've been doing this, it hasn't dissipated at all. If anything, it's just become more and more of a focus and more of a challenge, as I think the technology has proliferated, the number of devices out there have grown, and now you've added in this new paradigm of using consumer devices for healthcare. the Samsungs and the Apples of the world and some of these new players. So now you have even more devices, more data. Still, you have a fairly small consortium of leading EHR systems. And so you're now trying to integrate more into the same downstream systems using some of the same tools that have been around for so long. And maybe more recently, just starting to innovate on how we integrate those solutions. But I think that remains such a focus area and really is where my mind is when it comes to use, success of these medical devices is truly, can we make them interoperable?
And if I could just add to that, the challenge of where we bring this data together is huge. That's part of the interoperability issue. We're building on an infrastructure, as AJ points out, that was built for certain purposes. And as those of us who've been moving from healthcare provider to provider to provider can attest, maintaining, managing, and getting your medical records is incredibly complex, difficult, and challenging. And so to make it really useful and ubiquitous, we have to be able to bring all that information together. And I would suggest that the EHRs, while today the standard that the hospitals have to use, may not have been designed to be the best repositories. And those are fighting words, I know, for Epic and Oracle / Cerner, but they are the repositories we have. But it'll be interesting to see how various others in the data storage and analytics business take this on. And I'll just add one last point, and I know we have to move on to the next poll question. We got this far into this without having talked about AI and machine learning. That may be a record for a webinar nowadays. I will put into there the promise of AI and machine learning, because no clinician, I've been using the Cardia device since it was called AliveCore as an early test system, and for probably 10 plus years. No clinician wants my ECG information 24/7, 365. They want to know a half hour before I'm going to have a heart attack so they can call an ambulance and tell me to take an aspirin. They want to monitor me for 30 days because they're required to monitor me in order to prevent remittance penalties. But really the challenge in all this is to get to the heart of what AJ touched on. I'm getting all this data, but if I can't turn data into information and then information into real action, and John touched on this, he talked about the actions of the clinicians have to change. I'll go even further. The behavior of the patient is going to have to change, because we can provide a ton of information, but human beings are very resistant to translating that into personal action and taking impact on that. So with that as a thought, I'll turn it back over to Scott. I think you've got another poll question, which will then lead us into the examples that both John and AJ will talk about further.
Yep. Yeah, I do have one more poll question, and that's what are the expected benefits that MedTech companies can achieve from hospital anywhere? So again, we're looking for up to your three top benefits that you're hoping to see there, and so a full list there. Let you guys all read through that, and I also want to mention that we are coming up on the Q&A portion of the event. So if you do have questions, please put them in. We've got a couple of good ones in there, but there's still, I think, space in there for a few more. So please, if you've got a pressing question, the experts are here. Put your question out there. You get an answer. All right, answers are rolling in. We've got a clear leader, but it's fairly close. So we'll give that a few more seconds. All right, let's give it about 5 more seconds. And I'm going to close this down. Okay, so our top choice was improved patients' quality of life. 75% of respondents picked that one. And then improved therapy effectiveness was next, followed by new revenue from digital services. Interesting. Any surprises in there for you guys?
Let me take a shot. I've been doing a lecture on digital health for well over a decade. And one of the charts I used to use actually came from from Intel. It was a great one. It showed the cost of treating someone in the ICU at roughly, I don't know, $10,000 a day back when the chart was created, and their quality of life at that point was quite low. And it showed a curve moving up then to the left that said, as I get people closer and closer to their home environment, both their psychological well-being, their health go up, and the cost goes down. And I think that's what the first one, the improved patient's quality of life. If we could provide care outside of a hospital environment, that's the place to go. And it just further bears that out. The improved therapy effectiveness kind of goes along with that. The interesting one is new revenue from digital services. So clearly we've got people in the audience who are struggling with, how do I make money out of this digital service? Just because I can generate data doesn't mean I'm going to make a lot of money in it. John and AJ, do you have any comments on this as well?
Yeah, the revenue from digital services, I'm questioning, is this an opportunity to create more revenue for the companies, or is this an opportunity for the revenue at the provider level, right? And hopefully it's both. And I'm glad that people are thinking about that, because to treat these more patients, you need to make sure that there is that payment in place. And I think it all starts, like you talked about, Bill, with where the data is at, but it needs to evolve towards how do we get paid for it. And I'm glad that that's, what is this, the third highest voting on this list. So.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, improving therapy effectiveness, I think, is one that jumped out for me. It's something that we look at quite closely for our continuous glucose monitoring. How do we leverage that device and that data to improve the effectiveness of therapies? And that goes beyond just what you would expect with insulin dosing and and the like, integration with pumps, things like that, to even patients that might not have diabetes, or might have prediabetes, might have obesity, or using GLP-1s. There is a relationship that is becoming more and more evidenced through some of the clinical information that's being released, and is being talked about quite a bit. The benefit of using a continuous glucose monitor together with a GLP-1. There was this fear for a time that, now that we have GLP-1s, everybody's going to take them and nobody's going to be obese and all chronic diseases will go away. And that's, aspirational. And I do hope that comes to fruition. I mean, I would love that for the world. But the truth is that, without knowing how your body's doing, without that behavior change, no matter what molecule you throw at somebody, what pharmacologic, I think the effectiveness of that treatment has a ceiling. And I think we're uncovering the real value of the interplay between devices and molecules. And I think that's going to be something that is going to be fascinating, especially as you talk about the buzzwords AI, ML, deep learning, as those come into the mix, how these things can sort of really, really advance care delivery going forward.
Good. I see we're running out of time. I'm going to move us on to the next slide. We've asked John and AJ to talk very briefly. And guys, if you could shorten it, we're down to about 12 minutes left, and we want to leave time for questions. But John, dive into Inspire's approach and what you're doing in this particular area. I've got your slide up. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could spend a long time on this, but I will keep it short and sweet. We had a strategy to wrap our implantable neuromodulation system with a digital ecosystem that connects patients and providers and allows providers to see on a day-by-day basis how patients are using their therapy, so that they can be much more effective in their use of time and manage patients by exception effectively and remotely where appropriate, while building their confidence in the therapy. There's also, we have seen, has huge benefits for the patient's confidence in their therapy, their adherence to it, and their engagement and understanding in it. So sleep, like diabetes, is one of the most connected areas of care. And this has been a very important part of us being accepted by the clinicians, but also allowing our system to scale into the future.
It has been a great ride, and your products. I will say this: you and Abbott are one of the few device companies that actually advertise your product direct to the patients, and that's a very interesting departure from the perspective of you're advocating your device use to the patients directly. AJ, I know we don't have a slide up here for you at this point, but if you care to comment on Abbott again and what you're doing in an example, and then we'll have Scott run us through the question. So go ahead, please.
Thank you, Bill. I'll just give 3 quick examples in lieu of having a slide. So one, we have our FreeStyle Libre portfolio of continuous glucose monitors, and I think one of the exciting areas that we're looking at is how do we take that same innovative sensing technology and meet other unmet needs in healthcare, and that could mean looking at different analytes to treat different therapeutic areas. So I think we're early on in that phase. I think there's some products that we've talked publicly about, like the ability to measure ketones and the value of that for managing patients in DKA, for example. But I think there's a lot of white space out there as we think about what else we can measure and what other unmet needs we can meet. I'd say that in AI/ML, we do have a plaque thickness measurement software called Ultreon, which is really exciting. It's an SAMD, really cool technology that can help an interventional cardiologist really determine the size of stent that they would need to place during a percutaneous intervention. So technologies like that, how do we leverage that learning into other areas, other divisions of the diabetes care gets me really excited. And then finally, I think this was mentioned, how do we get patients to the right treatment? I think sometimes referrals can happen too late, or inappropriate referrals can happen. And we know that right now we're projecting a shortage of 10 million healthcare providers by 2030. 4 out of every 10 healthcare providers are thinking about leaving the field. So how do we do the most with what we have? And I think some of our softwares, like our InView EHR software, can actually take data and let a provider know whether that's primary care or a general cardiologist referring to a heart failure specialist on who's appropriate for referral, and kind of getting that patient to an advanced therapy earlier.
Okay, great. Scott, we're going to turn it over to you. We've got some questions that have come in. If you've had a chance to curate those, why don't you ask us the questions and we'll do our best to answer them in the time frame that's provided. I'll point out as well, the slides will be available after the presentation too. So Scott, why don't you go with the questions, please?
Okay. Yeah, great. Excellent. There's a question here from Marianne who's wondering, can the speakers address how the vision of care anytime, anywhere can be realized in light of internet deserts, the digital divide, and health equity initiatives? And she's also wondering, should we as an industry be lobbying for internet access as a public health necessity? Is there a business case for universal access?
I'll tackle that one real quickly with the story and an anecdote, and then let the others touch on it as well. Because health equity is indeed a huge issue, whether it's availability of healthcare, whether it's the application of the same healthcare in the same manner across populations, or whether it's AI and machine learning. So health equity is a big issue. I go back, however, to the time frame probably 12 plus years ago. I was at a body computing conference out in San Diego, and a doctor showed up there, and we had lunch, and we were talking about computing and wearables and all that sort of thing. And he held up this wonderful device, and I've got one right here, and at the time it was an iPhone. And he said, "This to me is my most important medical tool I've got going now." And again, this was probably close to a dozen years ago. He said, "Because I provide healthcare in Kenya. And I can do things with this, and I can be connected, and I can deliver things that I just don't have an ability to do in any other fashion." And 12 years later, we're still recognizing the promise of all this wonderful digital technology we've got. So I believe it absolutely will help do that. It can help bring healthcare to people who don't get it today. The challenge in all of this, however, is going to be one of finance. And financial. I hate to keep going back to that, but that's what drives our system today. 10% of our under 65 population today doesn't have insurance in the United States. And so one of the challenges is, how do you provide cost-effective, efficient care in a $1 trillion market that we spend? So I think digital technology is important to bringing it to certain locations. I'm not sure universal access is the way to go, although I would argue that across the board, almost everybody in the United States today uses a cell phone for one fashion or another. I'll turn it over to AJ and to John. AJ, go ahead.
Yeah, that's. I don't really have too much else to add there. I will say that the FDA recently launched an initiative called the Home as a Healthcare Hub initiative, and a lot of that focuses on health equity and making our innovative technologies accessible. And so, as a medical device company, we're paying close attention to that. I think it's totally on point, and so. We're always thinking about that and excited to know that the agency is equally focused on that. And so, yeah, not much more to add. Thanks, Bill.
John, anything?
I think you guys hit it out of the park, and I think it's a great question, and I think that this is part of the promise of digital.
All right, excellent. Question here from Aaron, who's saying, it seems the data collection is the easy part. The hard part is what to do with all the data. And how do we protect and prevent providers and patients from getting overwhelmed and getting data fatigue? I know, Bill, you touched a little bit about on AI and maybe some promise, there with AI and machine learning, but anything else on that question?
Go ahead, AJ. Yeah, or John, go ahead.
Yeah, I do think that this is an insightful question, and it's the responsibility of the company to find ways to use that data writ large and to provide those tools to their providers. One of the ways that we at Inspire have been able to use it is actually to grow access to our care. So we have seen that a broader population was being treated with our devices than was initially indicated, and this is not something we support directly as a company, but something that clinicians do. But we were able to take some of that data, go back to the FDA, and actually expand our indications for our therapy using that. So there is a huge opportunity for companies to use this real world data to improve access to care, to improve care by seeing the patterns of the utilization, but it ultimately is largely the responsibility of the company to drive those insights and partner with providers and researchers to implement those and to find them along the way.
AJ, you probably get more data through your devices than anybody else. Do you want to comment on this?
I mean, really, the key takeaway is that the data in and of itself is not enough. We have to draw insights from it, and I think providers are looking for companies like us on the medical device side to extract those insights and present them. But it's not just about extracting the insights. We have to incorporate them into the workflow. So, EHR integration is just one element of that, but really understanding the day-to-day. And sometimes it takes, dozens and dozens of visits into a hospital and just looking and observing clinical workflows. And this is not just a provider. It's the whole team around her that manages that patient and how, we can really take these insights and really incorporate them so that there's value there. So, key takeaway, data is not enough. We need the insights and the delivery of those insights.
One of the things I'll just add to that, I agree with everything you guys said. I'm particularly excited. We're working with a client who's looking at the future value of data that you aren't using today. And it's a really just quick example. They're a company that's working on a basically few minute lung cancer detection test through breath analysis. But in gathering all the information, they're looking specifically at that. But because of all the stuff they're gathering, they're going to be able to analyze it, look at it, and figure out what else they can do with it in the future. They can look for other indications and other things going on. So there's the here and now and figuring out how we prevent, how we detect an epileptic seizure or how we prevent a cardiac event. But there's also if I'm getting the information in, there's always something I might be able to do with it in the future. And I'm particularly excited about that company's ability to parse all the data, look at it, and do some future stuff. Scott, how are we doing on time?
We are right up on time, so we're probably going to have to just about leave it there. Just did want to leave 1 minute here for just any closing thoughts from you guys, and maybe I'll start with John and then move to AJ and wrap up with Bill.
Yeah, I think my closing thought would be to focus on creating value for the patient and the provider. And if you do that, these types of solutions can be implemented effectively.
Yeah, and I think I'll piggyback on the value statement. I think traditionally we might look at value as the lens of will a payer actually pay for this solution? But I think when we take a step back and say, hey, there's a value to the provider, then I think some of those costs, economic implications will solve for themselves, because you'll get value from a lot of other aspects that don't need to traditionally come from a DRG or reimbursement model.
And I'll say the technology's here finally after 30 plus years of banging away at this. It's here. We need to change our infrastructure to allow for this. I will say this, things are happening and changing. When I'm often asked, where are we doing this now? I'm going to go to the diabetes care space because it's a chronic illness that used to kill people. We're managing it well. Thank you, Abbott and the others who are addressing it in this space. It's a chronic disease that's getting managed and managed well. I also see a big change in taking the technology home for dialysis. That's one of the things that's happening as well. We start to take just not only the monitoring out of the hospital, but we start to take treatment to the homes. That's one of the first advents of where we're really going. So the promise of technology is being realized. Now let's get the rest of the system in line and go do things that do provide value. So thank you very much. Thanks to my panelists and my fellows on this. We're happy to sponsor this from S3 Connected Health. I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Well, on behalf of the Smart Brief team, I just want to thank S3 Connected Health for making this event possible, and everybody have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you.